Okay, so you may have clicked on this video thinking, what does that even mean? DBD's realm is controlled by the Entity. The Entity is a creature that feeds off of the energy created by the emotions of those in its realm. The characters in the realm create energy through many different feelings and emotions, such as hope, desperation, and affection for one another. The energy from these emotions is used by the Entity to power itself and continue the trials within its realm. When a survivor dies, they gradually lose hope and parts of their very soul. Once survivors and killers are drained of their energy, they are tossed into the void, where they rot for eternity as empty, emotionless shells. So, who is going to be the first survivor that will be drained of their energy? Alright, so let's look at this purely statistically. The character who has been sacrificed the most within the trials is surely the one who is the closest to the void, and being drained of their emotional energy. In the summer of 2021, Behavior released an infographic that showed there had been a total of 1,884,239,570 sacrifices from July 2017 to May 2021. The most played survivors being Claudette at number 1, Meg at number 2, and Feng at number 3. Assuming these three are at least 10% plus of these sacrifice numbers, this means that these three have been sacrificed each around 180 million times. So, for perspective, it's pretty clear that it takes a while for survivors to get drained of their emotional energy to its entirety if some survivors have been sacrificed potentially up to 180 million times. This is just a guess too. That 10%, it could reasonably be double that at 300 million, or half that at 90 million. But either way, that's a big number. That's a lot of times to essentially die and have your soul sucked out your body by a spider. After this, it may lead you to think, well, okay, we've got an answer. Claudette has been sacrificed the most, and so she's going to be the closest to being completely drained of her emotional energy, followed by Meg and then Feng. I think, sure, this does play a part, but it's also worth mentioning that for every sacrifice there's also been a ton of escapes. For the 1.8 billion sacrifices there have been, there's been 1.5 billion escapes. 600 million of these are counted to the original survivors alone. So say Claudette and Meg both have at least 150 million out of those 600 million escapes, then they make up about 10% of the total survivor escapes. They may have been sacrificed 180 million times, but they've also escaped likely around 150 million times. Again, give or take about 5% or 50 million either side. So each time they are drained of energy through sacrifice, they are also reinvigorated with hope as they escape at nearly a 1-to-1 ratio. So purely from numbers, I don't think we can figure out the most emotionally drained survivor. We can basically assume this 1-to-1 ratio of sacrifice or survival is basically how the survivors keep their hope and their soul intact. So, who goes to the void then? What makes the survivor's situation even more desperate in the realm is that they can't really assist each other in the same way they may be able to outside of the realm. For example, a character like Bill may be willing to sacrifice himself for the other survivors, given his history. This then potentially leading to his hope diminishing first and his soul becoming empty, due to his lack of escapes. However, he can't really make that heroic move here, because he has no control over the other survivors and how much emotional potential remains in them. So each survivor is surviving on an individual basis of how much energy they have remaining, and they all produce this emotional energy in different ways. They can't really help each other out, aside maybe trying to keep one another hopeful and basically trying to win the trials and escape. When I made my Which Survivor Powers the Entity the Best video, I mentioned that I believe some of the characters were in the realm not for their own energy potential, but because they act almost like hopeful beacons that boost the survivors with the highest emotional energy potential. By this I mean, if you were to be put into a trial with your only teammates being some 18 to early 20s characters who look like regular people, you would feel less hopeful than if you looked over and saw Jill and Chris of Stars standing there. This leads me to believe that these beacons of hope characters are not going to be the first to go. Their presence alone inspires hope, and so even if they are largely drained of emotion elsewhere, their presence is enough to still make them valuable. Equally, on the flip side, the characters with the most sacrifices and most escapes probably aren't going to be the first to go either, because at the opposite end to these beacon characters, they are the ones that gain hope off of them to the greatest degree. Basically, I'm saying that Claudette, Meg, and Feng being at a scary 180 million sacrifices probably means they aren't in any danger at all. They're instead the entity's best characters, or source of energy. I think the lore reinforces this too, honestly. They're all out of their depth to a degree, but equally they're all very capable in their own right. Claudette may be shy and unsure in many ways, but she's also a very skilled skilled botanist, an undeniably useful skill in the realm. Meg in the lore can often act out of anger, and is heartbroken and fearful of the future as her mother is so sick, but she's also one of the best runners in her state, making her incredibly determined and great in the realm, fleeing from killers. Fang lost her touch a bit, but she was a professional and well-respected esports player, who went against her family and followed what she wanted. She's more just temporarily lost. In the realm, she's found this determination once more. These are all characters who have hang-ups, but are also very capable. With the reinforcement from the beacon characters, they're then going to gain a lot of hope too, making them great for the entity and the powering of its realm. They're all in the process of figuring out who they are. Their stories aren't resolved just yet. I think the people at greater threat are the characters who are played the least, and the ones who also have basically resolved stories. Now, forgive me for this part, but I don't have access to numbers into the billions and millions like behavior, so I'm going to go purely off of my much smaller findings. In my 100 games of Dead by Daylight video, I recorded a number of stats across 100 games, one of these being survivor encounters. Across 100 games, I recorded the 300 teammates I had, the least appearing survivor characters being Laurie, Quinton, Tap, Adam, Jeff, Jane, Ash, and technically Chris, although that one's a little more of a fun stat as Chris is just a legendary skin, and for a bunch of other legendaries I didn't see any. So let's just talk about the core, actual survivor characters. Out of this list, I want to then eliminate the licensed characters, as again, even though they may not produce much emotional energy themselves, they will certainly give hope to others, and act as emotional booster beacons due to their past experiences and knowledge. This leaves us with Adam, Jeff, and Jane. Each of these characters made up around 1.3% of the player base I encountered. The only character out of these three that I don't believe quite fits into having a resolved story is Jane. When we leave off with Jane in her lore, she is by no means resolved, and if anything, she's taken at the peak of the emotional climax of her story, or just a bit after it, when she's driving to see her father. So we're going to narrow it down to just Adam and Jeff. I think it's pretty interesting because Adam and Jeff, I think, lore-wise, actually kind of fit for being the ones to lose their emotional energy first. Let's talk about the both of them. We're going to look at what I think are the three main emotional energy sources for the entity that the survivors produce: hope, desperation, and affection. Adam first. Adam, I think, does certainly have hopeful notes to his story. He has a rough childhood, but works his way up to be highly educated and well respected, and he's rewarded for it too. I want to partly attribute this to hope, but to me it doesn't seem like he's particularly hopeful, but instead he seems more like a person of reason, and he simply understands that his hard work produce results. If we read the flavor text of a few perks, I think I can prove this. Deliverance is reading, I was raised by a strict man who taught me how to make the best of a bad situation. Autodidact's reading, there's no limit to what you can achieve as long as you back it with hard work. These are arguably hopeful statements, but my interpretation is that they're more so about logical applications to bad situations to get you out of them, and less to do with feeling optimistic or hopeful, but instead being sure of your own skill, if that makes sense. Adam, I don't believe, is going to be in a state of desperation either, beyond the understandable initial shock of arriving in an oversized spider's realm at least. Adam has gotten over the hurdles of his life, he doesn't seem fazed by hardship, and understands with the correct applications that he can overcome it. The only area where I would argue Adam does definitely show his emotional potential is when it comes to affection. As a teacher and an educator, he does appear to genuinely care for his students, and feels connected to them. Further, just before he is taken by the entity, he is in a train derailment. As the train is flipping over, he moves in the way of a detached door in order to protect a girl, so it'll hit him instead of her. This affectionate or protective side to him, I believe, is his biggest contribution of emotional energy to the entity, and is certainly a means to provide hope to others too, knowing you have someone who will protect you by your side. Let's move on to Jeff. Jeff is going to have some hope. He grew up as an only child, to parents who argued and constantly fought, and then at school he finds it hard to make friends, and eventually he moves away from Ormond. This leads him down a bad path, eventually resulting in him getting into a fight and nearly becoming blinded in one of his eyes. From here he turns his life around, going to art school and becoming an artist, taking a steady job, and adopting a dog. He turned his life around, and now he's likely pretty hopeful. With all this said, his arrival into the realm, I believe it is going to unravel his years of hard work and hope, all that he went through, all that he changed, and now it's been set back to square one, or square minus 10,000 now that he's in the realm. In terms of desperation, I don't think he's going to feel any more. He spent probably around 20 years turning his life around, only for it to get somewhat reset. I think he's going to be annoyed more than anything, but of course desperate to some degree also. I also don't think he's too desperate because his story is pretty resolved by the end of his lore. His parents are gone, he's back in Ormond, his hometown, and he seems rather content with how far he's come. I think him going to the realm will lead to more of a sadness than any form of desperation. It sucks he's there, but all of his other hang-ups no longer are. He's completed his story arc almost, really. Finally, Jeff's most likely source of energy, like Adam, is his affection. He's shown to be caring despite his tough appearance. This can mostly be seen through his adoption of his dog and care for it. Although he doesn't seem to be much of a people person. He also seems to have quite a weak relationship with his neighbour, who gets tired of caring for Jeff's dog, leaving it to become a stray again when he doesn't return, after Jeff is taken by the entity. His colleagues too, upon his lack of appearance, just assume he's dead too, and don't seem so phased either. It's kinda sad honestly. But hey, his dog never stopped looking for him. So both of these characters have somewhat of a resolved story, they aren't too hung up on their past, and the tragedies that happened during their life have largely been overcome. So the state we see them in the realm is one of completeness and contentedness. This doesn't mean they're okay with being in the realm by any means, but they also don't exactly have anything to resolve within their lives that hasn't already been outside of the realm. To conclude, I think out of these two, Jeff is the most likely to fall to the void first, through a combination of his hope being near to nothing, the feeling of no longer having any desperation, and finally his affection being the only thing that may be keeping him in the trials instead of the void. It sucks to say, but I think Jeff will be the first to run out of energy and tossed to the void. It feels bad too because he's one of my favourite survivors honestly. Of course this video is being quite subjective and based on some figures which I realise aren't exactly a direct or surefire indicator of player numbers and stuff like that, but I hope you enjoyed the video regardless, and be sure to drop your own thoughts on who you think is going to be the first to lose their energy and enter the void down below. Thanks, and goodbye.